Well, hi, Tracy, and welcome to Rebuilding My Health. I'm excited to have you here today, along with your doggy friend, to chat with us about anxiety, which is
Yay! This is Lily. We're very excited to talk about anxiety. She will mostly just be napping in my lap, but she was not going to put up with being on the floor. So here she is.
guest dog Lily looks like she does not have anxiety.
It's not. How
Well,
many people do?
yes, yes. Well, Tracy, just kind of start out by telling us more about who you are, just a quick introduction.
Okay, so I call myself a functional anxiety detective because I help people find and fix the hidden causes of what I call therapy-resistant anxiety, and we can get into what I mean by that in the conversation. But really, what I want to share is my personal story growing up as the daughter of a psychiatrist, being told that anxiety is just a genetic chemical imbalance, feeling sorry for those people who are sick with anxiety. I helped out in his office growing up. I was like an emotional support kid who would take me to see patients when he did rounds, like in psych hospitals and nursing homes. And when I was 19, I had my first panic attack, led to a lot of anxiety. And it was so painful, but I didn't want to buy into this idea that I had some genetic defect and that I just had to be on meds the rest of my life. Meds actually weren't a good fit for me. Um, so that just started this whole journey to try to heal it. And then I ended up having some other experiences. I jokingly, like I told you, I feel like I've had almost all the causes of anxiety. There's so many, we use one word anxiety, but there's so many causes. And I jokingly say I've had almost all the causes. Makes me very qualified personally and professionally. Yeah. So like formally, I have a PhD from UC Berkeley, where I did a joint program with UCSF Medical School in medical anthropology. So I'm also excited to share about how my research in medical anthropology shaped the way I'm seeing the anxiety epidemic and helped me find solutions that actually worked for me that are actually I'm using to help other people. But yeah, but I know this is more about people's personal stories, so I'm happy to.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, but I think that research will be really interesting to get into as well. Great. Well, so you do have a long history with anxiety. When is your, I guess, earliest memory? Like, when did it start?
So you know what? The first time I was aware that I had anxiety was because I was having a panic attack. Then I was 19 and it was horrific. And so I'm guessing, I grew up eating junk. My dad had really severe unresolved trauma and he had rage. So he was definitely, I think if he had let himself get help, would have been diagnosed on the spectrum, maybe Asperger's with, narcissistic personality disorder, OCD, and something called intermittent explosive disorder, where someone's nervous system dysregulates to the point some tiny little thing, like you set the table wrong, or you didn't set up the dishwashing right, or you left a chair in the middle of the room that he tripped over, and he would just go into rage, just rage. And he was also closet gay. So he had a horrendous childhood of every kind of abuse, all the kinds of abuse. And so I think growing up in that environment, it wired my brain to have a hypervigilant nervous system, right? And so I probably had some angst or somewhere along the spectrum of what we call anxiety, but I wasn't aware. It was just kind of what it felt like living in my house growing up. But when I got to the point, I was in college, I was 19. I'd been having, I was really enjoying it. I was enjoying actually being away from like all of that, And then I have this panic attack and I'm just like, what? And that's when it became officially a thing in my consciousness, but I'm sure it started before that.
Yeah. Did you know it was a panic attack?
Oh yeah.
You knew at the time, yeah. Like
Yeah, I
you,
grew up working in a psychiatrist's office. Exactly what it was.
yeah. So yeah, I guess you had the language and the awareness of that from your yeah childhood. So interesting. Yeah. So that was kind of your first experience with anxiety, and yeah, panic attacks are terrifying. Yeah, and they sort of look different, I think, for people. People think they're having heart attacks or
Uh-huh. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there are a lot of things that people think they're having heart attacks. Like I call it fake heart attack GERD. There's a kind of acid reflux that can radiate down your arm and into your jaw and everything. Yeah. So, and then also panic attacks. I remember once I was having anxiety and I ended up in the ER because I thought I had some medical something, and it ended up, the attending doctor said, like 80% of people come into the ER are actually, it's just anxiety or nerves or something like, they're having anxiety and we can't find anything medically wrong with them. And I'd like to put a pin in that because there are physiological drivers of anxiety, but medical school doesn't train, physicians to find them or even psychiatrists.
Right, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, and that is absolutely what you've uncovered along the way in your journey. So kind of talk about like what then from there, from that first panic attack, what anxiety has looked like for you throughout your life and like how it's shown up in different forms and what you've learned.
So many kinds.
Yeah, sure. Opening the box, the big box.
Yeah. Yeah, so there was so I jokingly say, I had the PTSD trauma kind. A lot of what was happening for me in college, besides I was eating more crap than ever before and partying and whatever. And I also was learning a lot about the world, studying social sciences. I was learning a lot about corporate corruption and like I went from being kind of naively trusting and, government and corporations and all these things and the medical system to like realizing like, wow, humans are pretty flawed creatures. We have so much beauty, but then we have the shadow side to us that can be very corrupt and cause a lot of harm. And it was just very disorienting to me. And then I ended up running into some guy that was a mega conspiracy theorist. And he put a bunch of stuff in my head that like, I didn't know how to sift and sort like this new real stuff I was learning from like the made up stuff in his head. And so, and I think that with, some other habits and things just kind of culminated and the panic attack. And then it just kind of destabilized my sense of like safety in the world, that the world's a good place and that I could even have a good future to look forward to. And, I like to say that when that first happened, I was scared my cheese was going to slide off my cracker for all of eternity and never come back. Like I was just going to have a friend who calls it that when you lose your mind. And so like, I was just scared. I was scared something had snapped in my head. I remember my dad telling me, and I think he was talking about epigenetics. He didn't use that word, but he was talking about how some people have genetic predispositions. They can not have a mental illness, but then they start like experimenting with like alcohol or drugs or whatever the thing is. And, that can like flip a switch. And, he was talking about a patient who was schizophrenic and but his parents had been schizophrenic, both of them, but then he wasn't. But then he started, recreationally doing drugs and partying and drinking. And then he became schizophrenic. And I was like, oh, I've been partying. I mean, nothing too heavy, but you know what I mean? But I just was like, oh my God, like I flipped a switch and now I'm going, this is my life, And then I was like, no, something was like, no, I refuse. Nuh-uh. No way, not doing this. Like, I'm not going to take on this. Like, I'm defective. It's my genetics. The way I literally felt was like, I'm either going to solve this. I'm going to figure out how to make this stop without pharmaceuticals, because I'm like the queen of side effects. And I think something in me just didn't want that. And I think some of it was pride, just not wanting to be labeled crazy, because back then there was so much less empathy for people with mental health stuff. And so I was just like, no, I'm going to solve this. I'm going to figure this out. And so years later in grad school, where I had another resurgence of anxiety because doing a PhD is, pretty stressful. I was at UC Berkeley. I remember I was a graduate student instructor and I was writing on the board and I had taken like some supplements like ginkgo biloba. I don't know. I was taking some stuff to help make my brain work better. I don't know. But anyway, I had paradoxical side effects. Later, I would learn a lot of the stuff I was taking actually can make anxiety worse, not better. So that's some depending on your genetics and biology. So I'm like writing on this whiteboard, trying to teach at UC Berkeley, graduate student. I'm a graduate student instructor, undergrads. And suddenly I start having like where my arm goes limp and I'm just like, and I start feeling this panic inside and I can't use my arm. And I'm just like, and luckily like it happened right at the end of the session where it was like time to end. And I just covered it up somehow and went outside. And I saw one of my people in my cohort, another grad student, he was sitting on a bench and I walked up to him to like for solace. And he's like, oh my God, I'm having a panic attack. And so I was like, oh my God, me too. And so we sat there and we just spent a few hours together having our panic attacks together in grad school, because that's like a thing. So anyway, what ended up happening was I realized, okay, so fast forward, I struggle with anxiety on and off. Well, and then, okay, so I'm in grad school. One of the things I'm studying anthropology, and I was very interested in medical anthropology. I was interested in how people and different cultures heal themselves, deal with illness. I have this sense that we've disconnected from nature. And I had just some vague sense that we've lost touch with something deeply wise and sacred. And then what I started noticing that made perfect sense is that when I was researching, different indigenous communities and traditional rural communities, there was this pattern over and over again that anthropologists studying in those communities all over the world on every continent, universal, that when these people started adopting an industrialized lifestyle, drinking Coca-Cola, eating processed food, being exposed to environmental toxins, whatever, they started developing not only chronic disease like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, cancer, whatever, autoimmunity, all these things, but they also started developing mental health issues like anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, all these things that they didn't have before.
Right, right. Yeah, it's so clear. Like, it feels like we know this, but it doesn't really change much in terms of behavior and all that. But yeah.
That's when it's like, this is proof that I don't just have some genetic chemical imbalance. This is proof that anxiety, and I started looking at statistics, and it's like, like maybe 20% of people get diagnosed with an official anxiety disorder, but like 40 to 50% of humans, like at some point, have debilitating anxiety episodes in their life, but may not be. And these are the people who are statistically reported. This doesn't include all the people who aren't recorded, And then, it's like 70% of people at least report that they are just chronically like overwhelmed, stressed out, somewhere on the spectrum from stress and overwhelm to anxiety. Like, this is like almost every human, probably every human at some point in their life is going to experience it. So if it's a genetic defect, then our whole species, or almost our whole species, is defective. Does that make sense? Right. So what I really realized is what I think we all know intuitively is that, anxiety is a symptom, not a disorder. It's a natural response to an unnatural environment, because we've normalized a toxic culture that tries to override nature instead of working with the intelligence of nature. And what I realize is if I can redesign my life and look for solutions that work with the intelligence of nature, which I call our inner genius, that's why my brand is Inner Genius Health, but just like that intelligence of nature in our cells, in our microbe cells, our human cells, our DNA, in our souls, in our consciousness, then that's how we can heal. And the problem is we're trying to address anxiety with the same thinking that caused it in the first place, which is patented synthetic molecules. And I'm not judging people who take meds. I'm not saying there's no place for them. I'm just saying they're like duct tape. They don't fix the problem. So it wasn't until grad school that I really started changing my thinking. And then that accelerated my recovery because I understood. And I had already lived in Spain and accidentally lost 100 pounds just eating more natural, and I still party there, but eating more natural food than I ever had in my life. So I'm like, whoa, like, that's when I realized, because I thought I was overweight because of genetics, because almost everyone in my family was obese, and then I realized, like, oh, that's not genetic either. That's environmental and cultural. So I started realizing all these mental and illnesses and chronic diseases, these are environmental, cultural problems. They're not just genes play a role, but that you can't just like say it's all genes or it's all aging, like that's BS. So, but then I would go on after that. So after I recovered, I really got my lifestyle turned around to where I wasn't really having anxiety anymore. I felt great. I got into yoga, meditation, all this stuff. But then I had it again when I came back from doing my field work in Cuba. Cuba was very stressful under Fidel Castro. So I came back. I realized I learned what an empath is, and I was picking up everyone's stuff. And so then I had to, once I got out of grad school, then, then I was, like yoga, meditation. I even started teaching breathwork, meditation, yoga on the side in addition to functional health. And, that was really wonderful. And then I got where I thought, okay, I'm done. Like, I don't have to deal with this again, the chronic anxiety, and then I was living in a house in Hawaii, lived there 9 years. And I just noticed that, I was meditating 2 hours a day. I was like, cause I loved it. I was meditating 2 hours a day. I was eating super healthy. I was working out. I was more fit than I've ever been in my life. Excellent sleep hygiene, like all the perfect, I'd done all this trauma healing. I'd done all this work on myself, breath work, meditation, nervous system retraining. I'd done everything. And I started developing this horrendous anxiety. It was debilitating. So
Crazy. And
and
what
then
was it about?
turned out So I call that house the murder house because it was trying to kill me. No, so it turned out that house, not only I was aware there was probably a mold problem because it was Hawaii has like 85% humidity. So if you live anywhere high humidity, like you probably need to be aware of mold, get tested or whatever. Because it can show up in a huge range of bizarre symptoms. But the first warning signal I was getting that my brain was being poisoned, that my body was being poisoned by my home was anxiety. So I was aware mold was probably an issue, got tested, and yeah, there was mold. And so I was always kind of battling that. But one thing it's kind of embarrassing that it was so obvious I couldn't see it. The paint was peeling in the house and the landlords wouldn't fix it. And they kept saying, well, that's just the humidity. And I had actually repainted it because it was peeling when we moved in, and I sanded it and everything. And I don't know why, I did. I feel embarrassed because, you think in functional health, I would be thinking about lead paint, but people always say, oh, that just affects babies. And if you don't pick at it, whatever. And, and of course, sanding it and repainting it was picking at it. So anyway, and then within 2 years of repainting, it was peeling again. And then I asked them if they would take care of it. They wouldn't do it, but I didn't want to leave because it was like, felt like my home. It was beautiful. It had the most stunning view, like one of the most gorgeous views you could ever fathom in your life. And that view almost killed me because that was lead paint. So I had toxic mold and lead paint, and then my immune system was so trashed by that, I ended up with Lyme, because Lyme can be latent, like through saliva transmission from a partner. It could be, whatever, something you were exposed to. Like most people have been exposed to some kind of tick-borne or vector-borne pathogen, or like, what we call Lyme, but it's not just Lyme. There's a bunch of other bacteria. But anyway, I ended up with that. So then I had this trifecta, which is called MSIDS, multisystemic infectious disease syndrome, where I had, anyway, I had Lyme, mold, and lead poisoning, and the anxiety was off the chain, and it eventually turned to suicidal ideations.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah. And did you connect at the time your anxiety to all of this based on what you knew?
The mold, yes. I didn't know I had Lyme. That took a while to like figure that one out. And yeah, like I just kind of thought, well, I don't remember being bit, but I remember my mom picking a tick off my head when I was little once or whatever. But like I never got the bullseye rash, I never got sick, I never was symptomatic. It took a lot of research and, just learning to understand that, most of us have some exposure to a lot of these things we call pathogens or diseases, but it's not the presence of the critter that makes the disease. It's how your immune system dances with it. And if your immune system can't keep it under control or dormant or non-destructive, then that's when you get sick. And so anything that damages your immune system, like mold, which is an immune suppressant, because mold toxins are used in medicine to make immune suppressant drugs for organ transplant recipients.
Mhm.
So it's an immune, so when you're in an environment that's suppressing or in some ways it suppresses your immune system. In other ways, it puts your immune system on hyperdrive, depending on which part of the immune system. Like these chronic inflammatory pathways get really lit up, but your ability to fend off infection and stuff like that can actually be very compromised. It's very complex. And then you throw, and then what can happen is like anything latent, like Epstein-Barr or shingles, or any kind of parasites or gut infections or imbalances of bacteria in your body can suddenly like take over. And then you end up just constantly playing whack-a-mole with all this bizarre health stuff. And it's very unlikely you're going to go to your primary care physician or even a specialist and get this sorted out, unless they specifically have learned about it themselves. They didn't
Right.
learn it in medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, right. Absolutely. Typically, if you go with these symptoms, especially the anxiety symptoms, to a doctor, they're just going to recommend medication, going to
Right.
say, well,
Yeah.
let's look for these causes. Yeah.
And
Right.
imagine, like I might have said this already, but like, we have one word for anxiety, but there's so many causes, like lifestyle, blood sugar, hormones, and then not to mention I'm going through this, and then I'm bumping up against perimenopause at the time. And you know what I'm saying? And so, and then lead is terribly impactful on estrogen levels. And so, and then it also stores in your bones. So then as your estrogen drops, you start like losing bone density, and then the lead starts releasing into your system, further tanking your estrogen. And it's like a slippery slope. And I just, there's so many reasons. Perimenopause and menopause in our culture, like in North America and, more industrialized cultures, is a nightmare. And then there are cultures where it's not a big deal at all. And a lot of it is lifestyle, environmental exposures, stressors, and just how we think about aging, that it's amazing. So just hormones, men, Like, we call it menopause, andropause, like men are going through it too. They may not, it may not get as much press, but I deal with a lot of male clients who are having anxiety and social anxiety and just all kinds of issues because their hormones are in the toilet, their testosterone and other hormones are in the toilet. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's complex.
Yeah, which I'm sure most have no idea that that's what's going on, really, because I don't know many middle-aged men who are getting their hormones tested. It's just really not discussed or done. Yeah. So
It's
the
usually second for men to get tested. Yeah.
yeah, right. Yeah, that makes sense. So I mean, would you say is it for all of the causes, and I mean we can talk about the different causes, but is it brain inflammation that is basically triggering mental health symptoms? Right. Yeah.
Yeah, Casey. So it's neurotoxicity, neuroinflammation, which is just fancy talk for your brain is poisoned and your brain is inflamed. It's swollen up. That's over. It's not really just swollen inflammation. It's like it's it's a biochemical immune process of an inflammatory response. And mold erodes the blood-brain barrier. So do heavy metals, so do other toxins. They erode this very thin, it's like barrier that protects your brain from all kinds of chemicals and toxins, and now they can get through and hurt your brain. And so, and not just your brain, but like your cellular chemistry, like they can upregulate something called glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It's basically like we call it a brain chemical, but it's a neuro, it's why am I forgetting the anyway, neurotransmitter. It's a neurotransmitter it's very stimulating, right? And then we have like adrenaline, um, you know, so there are all these different neurotransmitters, and some are calming like GABA, and some make us feel like happy, or at peace like serotonin. Some make us feel like excited about the future and motivated like dopamine. I'm oversimplifying. They actually do a lot more than all those things. But so when something is happening in our body, and we have this delicate symphony of cells. We have the cellular symphony that's like so genius and always trying to balance itself, but we're throwing so much at it, more than we have the evolutionary capacity to handle. And, our bodies are trying to keep up. But what's going to happen is you throw the whole thing out of balance. You throw the whole symphony out of balance, and then it's playing out of tune. And that shows up as symptoms. That's our body. That's nature's way of saying something's wrong. So, yeah, so it is brain inflammation, it is brain toxicity. Also, if we're not eating well, then our brains don't have the nourishment they need to repair themselves. And so your brain's being torn down faster than it can rebuild. And then that shows up as not only mental health issues, but then sleep issues. And I had all of these, like sleep issues, anxiety, depression, I already said insomnia, brain fog, memory problems, cognition issues, like eventually neurodegenerative disease can happen. Someone else who lived in the house with me for 5 of the 9 years, he ended up with Parkinson's. I'm sure there were multiple causes, but he showed up with definitely high levels of, lead and mold. And but he also had, he had other, he worked in construction. So he was, I'm sure, getting exposed in a lot of areas. So, but I see a lot of people with Parkinson's, when I look at their labs, they almost all have Lyme, mold, and metals.
Hmm.
So mate.
Crazy. Crazy. Yeah. So I guess you've talked about the different types of anxiety, and would you like name them, or can you put them in the buckets, or
Sure, I can put them in buckets.
yeah.
So there's lifestyle. They're just lifestyle habits, like things we do that throw ourselves off and keep our bodies from being nourished and safe. Then there's you know, imbalances in our microbiome, like microbial imbalances, which are not only imbalances of, I call them critters because it's cuter than microbiome. And it includes all the different, not just bacteria, but, viruses and protists and, all these different critters. And, but then there's like hidden infections, right? So there's like Lyme, mold, Epstein-Barr, parasites, bacterial overgrowth, viruses, other kinds of viruses, even like long COVID, things like that. So there's just like the microbial imbalance. And then another bucket is going to be toxic exposures. So that's like heavy metals and molds and just like cleaning products and lotions and plastics, and just it goes on and on and on. Petrochemicals, just additives, preservatives, fertilizers, pesticides, all these things are just filling, I use this metaphor of like a bucket of tolerance. Like your body has like However, it can take this much stuff. And then when it starts flowing over, it can't keep up. And then you start falling apart, you get sick, right? And so you have to, like, you can't just say it's one thing, because if your bucket has like 20 things in it, you have to empty the whole bucket. So like what's causing anxiety is going to be a bucket full of like lifestyle habits, of, looking at your gut health and, making sure you don't have these infections. We call them stealth infections or hidden infections you don't know about. Because a lot of them are subclinical. Like a lot of people think if you have parasite, you're gonna have diarrhea and vomiting, like, like when you go to Mexico and get sick, but that's not necessarily true. And they can hide in something called biofilms in your gut and sinuses and things like that. So anyway, and then you have, so we have the environmental toxins, the infections, lifestyle habits, and hormones. But hormones are kind of downstream of all the toxins and the stressors and the lifestyle habits, right? But I put them in kind of a bucket because I like to test for it. So that's one of the reasons I like to have people do advanced functional gut testing, do a total toxin panel, look at their toxic burden, do an advanced hormone test, not just the blood hormones, but like a urine hormone test. It's really good. It gives you a lot of really good data. And then, and then some blood work, and here's another thing is just your mineral balances that can be tied to genetics, but also to all the other factors I just told you about, which is why I always have people get tested for, I don't know if you want this level of detail, but you can test to see if you have high free copper or what your high free copper index is, but most doctors aren't trained what to order to be able to do it. And then you have to do a math equation to find out what the ratio is, because you can have normal copper, normal zinc, normal ceruloplasmin, which binds copper. And then, but then if their ratios aren't correct, then you can actually have anxiety. Like I've had clients find out they have high free copper, and it's pretty easy with some supplements to correct that. And then boom, suddenly your anxiety levels go way down, and you're able to sleep better and have more positive thoughts and things like that.
Okay. Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. But you would never
Blood
know.
sugar. Yeah, I
Oh,
almost skipped blood sugar. And like if your blood sugar is erratic, that can cause anxiety. Yeah.
definitely. Yes. Yes. I noticed that with my child who gets super cranky at like 5:30 if he hasn't had a snack when he gets home from school. Like, why are you so cranky? That's why. Um, so yeah, and Tracy, I think one thing I'm curious about is just from my personal experience with anxiety, like I recognize it as a physical manifestation or a mental manifestation. And by that, I mean, most of my life, I had what I would call physical anxiety, where like my body feels like this weird edginess all the time. But then I did the things that you have described. I cleaned up my diet. I really fixed my gut and reduced stress and actually reduced caffeine. And so that went away. And so anxiety now, when I have it occasionally, it's more like obsessive thoughts, like I can't let go of, this one worry or something. So I guess, does it manifest differently depending on the type that you have?
Yes. And it's hard for me to say, well, if you have these symptoms, then it means you have this. And if it feels like this, then it means you have this, because there's that whole bucket of things, like, and it's all
Yeah.
overlapping complex, right? So usually requires some lab testing, but you can have physiologically driven anxiety that'll make you more likely to interpret your reality in a stressful, worrisome way. So, what's fascinating to me, I'm really big on meditation and breath work and cognitive reframing, changing your thinking and reprogramming yourself. It's just hard to override if your physiology is making chemicals of worry, of fear, of frustration, of fixation. It's really hard to override it mentally. I still teach people, breath work and meditation. I don't care. I don't buy it from anyone who says I can't meditate. You either have myths about it, like you're supposed to stop thinking, like that's ridiculous. You'll stop thinking when you're brain dead. Like it's okay to think. That doesn't mean you're failing at meditation. You just need to give your mind a job. And there are things you can do with your breath to put you in brain states where it's really easy to let go. And you just need to learn what works for you. And then there are other nervous system retraining techniques that I teach that are kind of modeled after internal family systems, where you talk to different parts of yourself, your biology even. You can do parts work with like parts of your personality and your inner child and inner children and all that, but you can also do it with your biology. And so anyway, I have a whole toolbox. I teach people to regulate their nervous system. And it's interesting because you can be in this same world with the same circumstances and either be freaked out about it or feel totally at peace with it. And nothing outside changed, just your internal environment changed. So
Yeah.
it's not either or, it's both. So I talk about top down and bottom up. So top down is shifting your consciousness and your brain states and your thinking to change your biology. Then bottom up is healing your biology to change your thinking and perception and consciousness. And if you don't do both together, you're always going to be like in this, I tried everything and nothing worked. I tried everything and nothing worked. And I also see people like trying one thing at a time. And it's like, I'm going to take one thing out of the bucket. It didn't cure my anxiety. I'm going to put it back. Now I'm going to take one more thing out of the bucket. It didn't fix my anxiety. So I'm going to put it back. And how are you going to empty your bucket if you keep doing that? And so I get it. Like, it's just, people need to be more systematic and less haphazard, but it's hard when your nervous system is dysregulated and you're anxious and overwhelmed to do that, right? So that's why it's important to get support. And yeah, and it took me so long to figure this out, Casey. It took me so long to really learn all this and figure it out, and to be able to help people in a matter of weeks to months, like who've had anxiety since I've had people who've had anxiety since they were toddlers. Like they remember being babies alone in their room, like shaking with anxiety and thinking they didn't even know it wasn't normal. They've had it their whole life. I've had, adults who were put in psych wards as children, and we figured out they had something like adult pandas. They had, well, they have it now, but they had pandas, which is like a reaction. They had, I'm like, did you have strep a lot as a kid? And they'll be like, yeah, and then it turns out, they're making antibodies against strep bacteria that's actually confusing the body. And they're making antibodies against their own brain because the proteins are similar. So it's amazing how many people have been made to feel defective and crazy when really they needed nutrition, they needed nurture, they needed a good health detective to run some labs and figure out what's going on and help correct it. And, and also some tools to master their own nervous system and master their own stress response and take control over your consciousness and the life you're creating. And these are tools we can learn, and they feel good. Like they feel good. They're not, and it seems so overwhelming and hard, but when you learn them, it's so exhilarating and empowering to feel better and learn you can heal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. To be able to have those tools, it is empowering. So let's talk about kind of short-term and long-term solutions. Like for you, you have, been through, and then with the clients you work with, the long-term solution is really to find those root causes, whether it's like the hormonal imbalances or the gut imbalances or latent infections or whatever's going on, and then work on, triggering that. Or what, I guess, shorter term solutions do you go to? Is it more like the breath work and
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I want to say supplements are just a supplement. They don't fix everything. Like I'm really big on lifestyle foundations. You have to build a foundation. So, my program is, you're building your lifestyle foundations the whole time. And then we're kind of running labs and going over them and, on the side in the background. But really, I cannot emphasize enough the power you have to change your mental health and your life and your thoughts and your perception of the world around you and your ability to create and serve through just your daily thoughts and actions. So to me, lifestyle isn't just diet and exercise. Those words have been like, we're numb to those words. It's your daily thoughts, actions, and environment, your physical environment, your social environment, your emotional environment. So that every day we're choosing if we're mouth breathing or nose breathing, if we're sitting up, where we can, not be in pain physically, paying attention to our posture, for putting nourishing real food in our body, or just doing fast food or just quick things, or even going to the health food store and just buying a bunch of processed junk food from the health food store and still not getting the nutrients we need. Being ramped about, it's so people are like, I'm intermittent fasting. I'm going to wake up, have coffee on an empty stomach and think if I just put some MCT oil in it, that's going to fix it. And then if you're running anxious and you're putting a stimulant in your body on an empty stomach first thing every morning, that's a recipe for chronic, and you do that daily, and you do that even more than one time a day, you're going to have anxiety. I promise you. Now, it may not seem fair that there's some people who can have drink caffeine and go to sleep. Those people don't have your biology. They may have other issues. They may run depressed. They may have weight issues. They may have other problems. So like, it's not like they have it all made in the shade either, but you have to work with the body you're in, right? So if you have, like, I have genetics that upregulate glutamate over anything. Like I take, amino acid supplement, boom, glutamate. I'm like, I'm jittery. And, so I just know stimulants aren't for me. I need to be careful not to upregulate glutamate. And also we have this culture that's like, if you're stressed out, you go drink alcohol. I'm not trying to be judgy about alcohol. We're adults, we can make our own decisions, but I promise you, alcohol is a brain poison. It's a liver poison. It's a cellular poison. It's cytotoxic, hepatotoxic, neurotoxic, if you want to use fancy words. And so just things like take a break from alcohol, wean off caffeine, never quit cold turkey, but just wean off caffeine. And, I always say, keep the ritual sub the substance, so if you want a morning hot beverage, then do roasted dandelion tea or do rooibos chai or do something herbal. Like, this planet has so many fragrant, amazing tasting things you can make tea or a warm, roasty, toasty beverage out of. It doesn't have to be that one. And, and I just really, you have to wean off caffeine. You cannot quit cold turkey or I don't believe in doing things where you suffer just to, like, I'm just going to suffer my power my way through. If you think like that, that's another clue as to like why you might have chronic anxiety, how you're running energy in your life. So just getting back to your simple question, just, please don't hate me, but weaning off caffeine and just cutting out alcohol and getting real sources of energy from bone broth and from, really high quality, grass-fed wild caught, meat, seafood, vegetables, moderate amounts of fruit, like eating real food for a while, just eating unpackaged real food for a little while. And it can be very simple. You don't have to, be super gourmet unless you want to. And it's just so easy to throw in fun herbs and spices. I always say, become a spice girl or a spice guy. Make your food sexy. Even if it's simple, it can still be sexy. And so I teach something I call healthy hedonism, which is using non-destructive pleasure to heal yourself. So, like yoga, massage, meditation, breath work, a bath with candles. Men can take baths with candles. They do it in lots of countries. Lots of cultures have male bathhouses in
Permission
Asia.
to take baths with candles.
Yeah. Or like temazcales, like in indigenous Mesoamerica, like Mexico and Guatemala, men go into like steam baths and sweat huts and things. And so yeah, so there's time in nature. Just go outside, be in nature. Even in the winter, just put on a really good coat and go outside and look at trees and dirt and breathe in spores. So just kind of returning to more primal biology, having better sleep hygiene. I know I'm listing so many things. It's probably like, it's too much. I can't do it. It's too hard. But these are the things. That's why I have a structured program that I take people through, like in bite-sized steps, so they can integrate it, slowly over time. But just like pick one change, one at a time. Just I would suggest the caffeine, and then just wean off of that. But make sure, if you're, you have to have energy, you have to eat enough protein. This whole carbs and sugar for energy, that's BS. That's not sustainable energy. You need protein for energy, for lasting energy. Just things like that. These are things you can do. And if you want support, get support if it feels overwhelming. But if you feel like you can do it, then do it, and you'll get your head above water. You'll feel better. And then you might be like, what can I do next? Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned a lot of things, but some people will gravitate toward a
Yeah, just pick one thing. Yeah.
certain
But I
thing.
would say the caffeine, the alcohol, oh, and the processed sugars. Caffeine, alcohol, and processed sugars, those are some of your top enemies. More people than realize, please don't hate me, but more people than realize have gluten intolerances. Gluten damages intestinal lining of all mammals, even this one here in my lap snoring. I don't know if you can hear her. But so yeah, damaging your intestinal lining, that's not really a great way to build mental health because of the gut brain connection. So yeah, just so yeah, just pick something. But if I had to pick for you, it would be wean off caffeine, but you have to have the nourishment in place to still have to make the cellular energy.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
alcohol.
That makes complete sense. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and there's probably this pattern of kind of caffeinating all day and then using alcohol at night to relax, and then you're not sleeping well, and it's just
You're
yeah,
tired all the time, so more caffeine, and then and then you don't feel like cooking because you have no energy because you've been depleting. Caffeine doesn't give you energy. It actually steals energy from your future self. It's like living off a credit card when you have no job. So
Yikes.
you need to get a nutritional job. Like, you need to feed yourself and nourish yourself. And I'm not saying this from like righteousness or judgment or lack of compassion. I ate so much crap. I ate so much crap. I grew up eating so much crap. In my 20s, I ate so much crap. It wasn't until I got to Spain where people ate real food, where I learned to even cook. And I had this boyfriend who was an amazing cook, and his mom was a great cook. And I learned how to feed myself in Spain. And then I accidentally lost 50 pounds, not going on a diet, just eating delicious food in Spain and having a good time. And I was having an amazing time eating so much delicious food. I was eating so much. And I was like, I dropped so much weight. I didn't gain muscle. So that was another thing. I got down to like 120 pounds. I was too skinny. I should weigh like 130 something. So the point is, there are all these side benefits. What you need to do to heal anxiety is actually going to heal your life.
Mhm.
So it's going to heal your biology. It's going to heal your gut. It's going to heal your hormones. It's going to make you have a healthier aging process. It's going to, when we do what we need to do to heal, your whole life heals. Your self-confidence, your self-love, your ability to like have better boundaries with people. I cannot,
Mhm.
it's hard to put into words the power of when you decide, I'm going to optimize my life. I'm going to heal myself. I'm not going to settle for this mediocre symptom management crap suffering. And sometimes you even need to do work where you kind of do some shadow work and you say, like, how am I enjoying suffering? How am I enjoying being miserable or being a victim? What am I getting out of this? And really like let yourself enjoy the suffering, and just you'll be like, oh, this is so great. I love this. This feels so good. I love being miserable. This is, and just let yourself have it, because that'll help get rid of that push pull. And then at some point, your mind will get bored with that. And then you can start playing with the idea of what happens if I could create an amazing life? What happens if I could be happy and at peace in my own skin? What happens if I could eat delicious food that makes me feel amazing and feel confident and have mental health and physical health?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you. This is so much information. It's so helpful. I'm curious, like, is the goal to be anxiety free? I mean, is that, I'm sorry, not anxiety free, but like to live a life with no anxiety, or can we, are we just looking for like the tools to manage it, because you can expect that it'll still come up sometimes?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. And I'm surprised like almost no one ever asked me that. So I really love that question. So one of the things I like to say is anxiety, it's normal for anxiety to be an occasional emotion, but it doesn't have to be what we call like a debilitating disorder, right? And so the idea, anxiety is like a smoke alarm. It's your inner genius telling you something's wrong. So you don't want to not have a smoke alarm. That's bad, right? So, but the idea is to stop making fires that set off the smoke alarm. So you learn to stop making fires. Now, if my mom's in the hospital or something happens to my mom, I'm gonna have some anxiety. I'm gonna be a little nervous before I get on a stage, or if I were to go on a first date or something with someone I'm really excited about, I might have be a little nervous sided, right? That's a word I learned from my friend's daughter from My Little Pony. But anyways, so I think it's normal to have moments of anxiety or trauma triggers. So there are kinds of anxiety that are purely trauma triggers that you work on with a therapist. That's what I talk about in therapy resistant anxiety. It's the kind that you don't just fix with a therapist. It's being driven by your lifestyle and your biology. Now you still want to do your trauma work in conjunction with, do it all together, right? Because it's like a combination lock. When you get the right numbers in the right order, it unlocks. If you only get one number right or you do it in the wrong order, it won't unlock. So I think the goal is to have anxiety be something that happens on occasion, but you can identify what's causing it and you can get rid of it. I hardly ever have anxiety anymore. It's very rare. And when I have it again, I'm like, this is terrible. Like, oh my gosh, like, and it just makes me feel even more devoted to my mission.
Right. Yeah. 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 And then what is your go-to? Like, if you start to notice it in yourself again, do you think, oh, I'm going to do breath work, or I need to do some lab testing to see if there's something going on? Or like, how do you approach it in
My
yourself?
first thing is going to be to do nervous system work, like breath work, visualization, working with my emotions just to get it wrangled. Sometimes I might take, there's certain supplements I know work for me to calm my brain down. Um, I still have some lead in my system. It's still, I kind of thought and hoped it was gone, but it's not. And so I've accidentally liberated lead before, like even going to Mexico and eating too much cilantro, or like I love cilantro, but it's a chelator, right? And so, or I did some methylene blue and that, and or did too much ozone or whatever. So I've had some experiences where I liberated too many metals, and then it set me like into a total. So I had to take binders, and so I basically think, what caused this? Like, what set me off? What was the trigger? And so, and then I know how to fix it. And so I'm thinking, you're thinking if you're an average person, then I would say breath work. I have a guided meditation on my website that's just free, and it takes 15 minutes, and it works with pain and sleep and anxiety and overwhelm, and it puts you in a pretty blissful place. And it's something you memorize how to do, and then you can have it your rest of your life. So that I call it a magic brain trick meditation. I'll do that method. I'll do different kinds of breath work. I'll do visualizations, things like that to calm myself down. But then I usually need to figure out, what's causing it. I think because of what I do for a living, I can figure it out myself pretty easily. I think it's harder to expect someone else, to know how to figure that out on their own. Because it can
For
be
sure.
hormone,
Yeah.
perimenopause, menopause. It can feel like overnight when you're going through perimenopause. It can be like overnight that suddenly you're fine, and the next minute you feel like a crazy person, with the anxiety and insomnia or irritability or just anger or whatever. So, but there can be things that trigger that drop off the ledge, or the acceleration of that drop in estrogen. So,
Right.
or progesterone too. That's a big one. So yeah, so sometimes you have to adjust your hormones. So yeah, it's a skill set. That's why that's why I have a program, because I want people to learn a skill set around how to become your own anxiety detective. And then what to do with a practitioner. I do patient advocacy. So I teach people how to communicate with doctors and practitioners, what to look for, what questions to ask, familiarize people with different kinds of testing. So people are very literate.
Mhm.
Call it like medical literacy or functional medicine literacy. So people know what to do, they know what to ask for, they know what cost to anticipate, and they can strategize their way out of it.
Yeah.
So the idea is anxiety doesn't control you, you control it.
Right. Yes, yes. Right, right. You have to flip it. Yeah, well, I appreciate all your wisdom and really giving us hope that anxiety doesn't have to be this lifelong thing that you just manage, that you just have to find a way to manage, that it is possible to get rid of it. Yeah, that's been my experience, has been your experience, and you've helped so many people do that. So really appreciate your sharing your story and your wisdom. Any
If you've had it your whole life, even if you have family history, you can still stop it.
right,
I hear it all the time, but mine's genetic. Oh, but I have it, it runs in my family. Oh, but I've had it my whole life. Don't buy into that. Don't
right.
sell yourself.
Yeah, yeah, super important to realize that. Any other advice you would give somebody struggling with anxiety today?
You're not defective, you're not broken. Your body's not betraying you, it's your best friend. It's trying to get you some nurture, and you've got to slow down and prioritize yourself. Stop making everyone else more important than you. You've got to face this. When you face it, you will free yourself. You have to feel your way free. You have to face it to free yourself. You can't just keep running from it and trying to numb it out with medications or calming supplements, because it's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. You can't. It's exhausting and draining. So
Yes.
just get yourself help, like real help that works, not just band-aids, not duct tape. I like duct tape, but it doesn't work long term. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Tracy. And where can people find and follow you?
Innergeniushealth.com. That's my website. You can also, I'm on Instagram and YouTube, and yeah, and you can also just stalk me on the internet, because my name is spelled, it's no one else in the Google verse has my name spelled the way it is. So you can always find me by just looking me up on Google.
Okay, that's nice. There are not other Traci
For
Potterf
marketing,
out there, Dr. Traci
for
Potterf.
marketing, it's great. For privacy, not so much, but
Right. Right. Nice. Well, thank you, Tracy, for sharing your story and all your insights from so much investigation. And I know it'll help people. And thank you for
it's
bringing Lily
suffering.
with you.
Yeah. I don't want people to suffer as long as I did. I suffered so long and it was so hard and it's so complex but it's still totally solvable. So it has layers to it, but it's fixable. And it's
Yeah.
fixable and it doesn't take that long to make it better. It's like it can be in weeks to like just a few months. It can be a major life turnaround.
Okay, that's what you see is typically like weeks to months to getting it fixed.
Sometimes people within a week or two of making changes, they have it's not like, they've turned the dial down a lot. And then usually within just a few months, some people have more complex cases, but anywhere between weeks. And even if it takes a year, who cares?
Mhm.
Like this is your life, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I would say mine probably took longer, but I was doing the, kind of different layers of healing and just kind of getting better and better as I went. So yeah.
and I think because this is my specialty, I've like figured out how to fast track
Yeah,
it.
I'm sure you know how to fast track it. Yeah.
But people have to do their part. I can tell people what to do. If they don't do it, then they're not going to get better. But I also have learned a lot of skills of how to help people get on board, get out of their own way. That's one of the first things, how to get good at long-term change. Like that's one of the first things I make sure people know how to do so that the rest works really well.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Traci, thank you so much for your time and all your beautiful wisdom. And I know folks are going to take away some beautiful nuggets from this. So thank you.
AC.